Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. So, as we mentioned, like these are small points that Imam Nawawi ends the chapter of the book of funerals with. These are points that he collected from discussions about the funerals with his students and so on. So, one point is it permissible to ask Allah for death? Is it permissible to ask Allah, oh Allah, please hasten my death? And he says it is disrecommended, and there's a hadith about that. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, do not wish death for harm that afflicted you. Do not wish death for a harm that afflicted you. So it is disrecommended for a person to ask Allah for death because of a harm that afflicted him or her. Harm means sickness, means lack of money, poverty, things like that. It is disrecommended. You should have patience with it, and you shouldn't ask Allah for such a thing. The only exception is if you think that you're going to be tested in your deen, and a test that you cannot bear. If you think that you're going to be tested in your deen, a test that you think that will take you out of the deen. In this case, this is the only case that it is allowed. Actually, in fact, I think Imam Nawawi says, or Imam Sharbini, he says it is becomes mustahab in this case. It's recommended to ask Allah for death in this case. That's the only case that is allowed and recommended to ask Allah for death if you think you're going to be tested in your deen, a test that you cannot bear. Some people are being tortured and so on. We know what happens in many countries nowadays and throughout the history. Second point I mentioned is it is sunnah to seek treatment for diseases and sicknesses. It is sunnah, so it's something that if you do, when you take medication, you are rewarded for following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ when you are taking medication for a disease or for a sickness. However, Imam Nawawi mentions a point, I didn't mention it here. Actually, Imam Sharbini, he mentions this point. He says that if a person has this reliance on Allah, it's not for everybody, but some people have this very high connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this high dependence with Allah, and they don't want to take medication. You cannot force it. It's not obligatory. You cannot force them to take medication. So it's okay for them. I know a person that got sick with a very like a dangerous disease, like a life-threatening disease, and he didn't want to seek medication, and subhanAllah, he was cured. Allah knows how, but some people have this relation with Allah. So it is disrecommended to force the sick to take medication or eat. You shouldn't, as there's a hadith about it, you shouldn't force the person that is sick to eat or to take medication. This is something we do with our children quite often, you shouldn't force them, but you should encourage them, but you should tell them, well, you have to eat, encourage them, eating is good for you, medication is good for you, things like that. But you shouldn't force them or force a person that is sick to take medication or eat. The second point he mentioned, the next point that he mentions here is it is permissible for the family of the deceased and his friends to kiss his face. So it is allowed, and this is also evidence from the Sunnah, that it is allowed for the family and the friends of the deceased to kiss his face, to say goodbye, and say kiss his face, it's okay, it's allowed. And then the next point he mentions is it is permissible to announce for death, for people to come to pray and to make dua, even like announcing in newspapers, for example, in our time, right? Sometimes in newspaper, this is allowed. There's no problem with that. Okay, because you want people to know that this person died and make dua for him. When they say, oh, so and so died, I used to know him, he's a good person, it's a good thing for him. So you want to announce And he mentions it as announcement for salah. So for example, if there is a big masjid, after the salah, they announce in the microphone, "Oh, there is janaza prayer. Please come and join us." And maybe they wait for a few minutes till the people come, the neighbors of the masjid come to pray janaza and so on. Then he moves on to another point here. He says that people washing the deceased shouldn't look to the body of the deceased except as needed. You shouldn't be staring at the body of the deceased, except as needed. So you want to wash this part, you are looking at this part to wash it, or to make sure that it's washed or not, something like that, but you don't stare too much to the body of the deceased. This is sacred. The body of the Muslim is a sacred, is something sacred. We shouldn't be, crossing the boundaries with this sacred body of the deceased. So I think that is the last point for today. He has more points, inshallah, for next time.